The mystery of mysteries is the door of all essence. Tao Te Ching, do not feel lonely. The entire universe is inside of you. Rumi, the energy of the mind is the essence of life. Aristotle, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Nikola Tesla, in my experience, when you think you understand the Force, you realize just how little you know. Ahsoka Tano.
The program you are about to hear is fiction, science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction, fiction, fiction.
Hello and welcome to ExoFathom. I'm Ayla and I'll be your host tonight. I'm joined as always by my two lovely co-hosts, Nick and Mike. Good gentle folk, how are we doing tonight?
Happy Monday. Doing all right. How are you?
Good, doing good. How about you, Mike?
Oh, I'm hanging in there.
Hanging in there. Maybe like a hanging plant?
Yeah, like, with vines and stuff.
There it is. All right, cool. Well, I'm glad you said that because today we're going to talk a little bit about plant force. It's going to be a bit of a weird one. There's no real order, so we can kind of jump back and forth as you guys want. But I was going to do an episode on the Force from the Star Wars franchise, and just talking about, influences, real life, maybe scientific observations, stuff like that. But I got sidetracked by plants because they're like totally already using the Force, even as we speak. So let me open with one more quote, which I think is going to do a good job of showing us where this talk is headed. It comes from Julie Morley. She's author of Future Sacred, The Connected Creativity of Nature. It says, the continuum of intelligence, from simpler to more complex organisms, does not imply a hierarchy of dominion. Instead, it suggests a branching system of differential intelligence expressed in each species' ability to creatively adapt to the changing circumstances of its particular niche and umwelt. Our brains do not make us more conscious. They make us differently conscious. We are just one expression of consciousness in a potentially infinite matrix of intelligence. And I really like that quote. Like I said, we are going to circle back to that, but basically I'm thinking we'll talk a little bit about the Force and then kind of look at how plants are an interesting anomaly in the world that are kind of already doing the damn thing. So Nick and Mike, first, let's start with you. How would you describe the Force as it's laid out in Star Wars? I know you're both big fans.
I guess you would call it something like chi or pranayama or life force. It's that sort of energetic matrix that envelops everything, connects everything, binds it together. I think that's what Yoda says, right?
Yeah, I think so. 2 gold stars, Nick.
All right.
Michael?
I know we were being graded. Jesus.
I will be mailing the stars to you.
I was going to be the party pooper and just say midichlorians and giggle and then not say anything else.
I have research on midichlorians too, but yes.
We don't. Nobody wants to talk about midichlorians. The other idea is so much better. Yeah, but as Nick said, it's like it's the Star Wars version of the Logos. It's the energy, it's the thing that flows through everything and everyone. You can either try to pick up on it and do as the light side does and work with it or become like part of the flow, or you can do as the Sith does and dominate it and use it for your own purposes.
I like that. And just a side note, physicists today would call those metachlorians muons, something we can circle back to a little bit later. But cool. I mean, I like both of those descriptions. I kind of feel like it's similar, this idea that usually like all the Jedi, they close their eyes and they feel the force, and it's like this sense that can tap into it with or without midichlorians, or no, wait, how do you call, what are they? I almost said, I was trying to remember, is it midichlorians?
Yeah, midichlorians.
All right.
You can call it it doesn't matter. Just little bacteria that's in the blood, but yeah.
For a second, I thought I said metafloridians, and I was like, wait, no, that's not right.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Else.
It's Monday. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, you guys are right. I did some research. I've got, it's a mysterious energy field created by the life that binds the galaxy together. Kind of like what Nick said, there's a sense of a life force there, an energy that some people believe exists in all living things and keeps them alive. And it's just like a fun thought experiment. Have you ever thought about the difference between a living and dead person, right? Like what differentiates them is an unseen force, some sort of life energy that goes from like a bag of organs to something living and breathing. Would that be the force that separates them, or is it different? Because that's like spirit, right?
Yeah, spirit and force probably the same thing. Or you think about like the absolute, right? The same sort of concept. I would think everything integrates back into the absolute. The absolute then churns out new iterations of matter and life.
Yeah, like I want to avoid the question of if like aliens or extraterrestrials would have spirit, but they would know of the force, right? Spirit might be a human subset of the force. I don't know. Yeah, no, I concur with Nick.
Okay, yeah, and even if there were aliens, I think what you're saying, Mike, is there could be spirit to human is something to an alien. Yeah, I mean, it's that same thing, but with an absolute that maybe crosses alien species, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's the force of the universe, then everything inside the universe is subject to it. So you don't really have to be human specific.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but spirit might. We're gonna get stuck into this. But like, for example, in Catholicism, right, is soul or spirit and body there's two things, but it might be restricted to the human domain versus something else. But yeah, it's what I wanted to avoid. But yeah, no, the force as a whole, everything pulls from it, right? So it doesn't matter what the species is.
Yeah, well, and even in Catholicism, would the Holy Ghost be kind of like the Force? Or no? That's totally off, isn't that? I don't even know what the Holy Ghost is. I've heard about it.
Closer to the divine, yeah. Like, because you're dealing with a religious belief now, and you have to be a part of the belief to feel that Holy Ghost sort of thing. I think. But it gets closer to, like, I guess, the gods more so than like the Force. Like you would pull stuff from the Holy Ghost into your spirit, and you want to get your spirit closer to that Holy Ghost.
I kind of like that. That does kind of make me think of Force energy, and like a totally unlikely place too. But I like it. When I was thinking about this, I thought also about Kundalini energy. Nick, I think you talked about prana. And I also thought about like the Tao. I think in a lot of ways, the Force might be a bit of a knockoff from the Tao. Lao Tzu quotes are just like so similar, and kind of what they're getting at. And of course, roughly translated, Taoism, it refers to something like the way, the path, or the road, but it's used more to refer to like a spiritual flow or a way of the universe of which all things are a part of. And I realize I haven't done a lot of deep diving into Taoism. Are either of you familiar with Taoism concepts? And
yeah, the Chichen Chaos are real. I think that's what it's called. It's a good read. Got a chance to. I have a copy somewhere, but I read it a few years back. But it's just yeah, there's like one way, one path towards everything, and that one way or one path cannot really be described. Like if you described it, then you've misdescribed it, you
Yeah.
mischaracterized it. But there's a kind of a way towards everything, and you can feel it through all craft, through all being. It just sort of flows, and you should do your best to align yourself with that flow. It's the way of effortless work, I believe, or effortless effort,
Hmm.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just finding the flow state, pretty much, in whatever it is that you're doing.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and I like too, it's almost like it's also a container for the yin and the yang. So even though like duality is something that humans have a hard time dealing with, like so much of philosophy comes down to like duality, or you have zeros and ones, and Taoism is like this cup that contains the both of them at the same time.
Hmm. There's not much. You need both, right? And it's the same thing with the force. Like the anybody's using the light side will feel the pull of the dark side. Anybody using the dark side will always feel the pull of the light side. It's just how you orient yourself within that spiritual space.
And I always thought that was interesting because it creates the force as also something influenceable or external, But then it's also, well, I guess it's hard to say because with the Star Wars franchise, they kind of seem to go all over the place with the force, and there's not a lot of purism to be found. But like you said, yeah, there is this pull, and you have characters that kind of like have this hereditary nature, but there's still this opposite pull, and maybe that's what it is that like leaning towards whatever's going to put balance into you, maybe.
Um, I mean, balance should be strived for, but like in Star Wars, there tends to be dogmatic following towards either the dark side or the light side, which again, I guess, kind of gets back to Taoism, this notion that if you try to describe it, then you're kind of missing the point,
Hmm.
So you can argue that both Jedi and Sith are kind of missing the overall point of using that force. So yeah, at a
Hmm.
micro level, you should do the best to find yourself in balance of both your virtues and vices, if you want to kind of pull it towards like an old Greek idea, right?
Yeah.
Um, you don't want to be too virtuous, but you don't want to have too many vices. You should be
Yeah.
balanced.
Well, yeah, and I like that you kind of put in that like it's hard to describe, and when you describe it, you fail. I think that's part of why I ended up not making this a Force exclusive episode, because yeah, you get into it and you're like, oh, what am I defining? What is this? But just for those listening, Taoism, it is a religion and philosophy from ancient China. Um, it's been connected to the philosopher Lao Tzu, who was around 500 BCE, the writer of Taoism or the Tao Te Ching, even though some people think it's more of a collection of other writers and just quotes that are in the same vein. But yeah, and it holds that humans and animals should live in balance with the Tao or the universe. And, getting into the yin yang aspect of it, we talked a little bit about Jedi versus Sith. So, in the Star Wars lore, a Jedi seeks to become one with the Force, whereas the Sith and other villains exploit the Force and try to bend it to their will. Again, to both of you, I know you're both big Star Wars fans. Uh, do those definitions kind of feel good to both of you?
Yeah, I mean, those are the literal, proper definitions the the Jedi and the Sith and within the Star Wars canon. I'm not one of those people that goes like out into speculation worlds with Star Wars stuff. So like, if it is that, then it is that. If we're talking about like more of a abstract concept, then yeah, I mean, I think that those are just like Mike said, those are like you're kind of missing half the point with all of that. Um, that gets into more of a meta critique of Lucas's concept of the Force. Like if it's supposed to bring balance, why are all the Sith dead? That makes no sense.
Mhm.
Um, So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like if we're just being purists about the concept of the Force within the Lucas universe, then yeah, that totally sits fine with me. But if we're talking about a sort of meta commentary, then yeah, they're not really bringing balance within Star Wars. They're taking over.
Opposing forces. Yeah.
And even both
Yeah.
sides have their issues, right?
Mhm.
For the light side, they've become they become too dogmatic, too religious in their ideas. So it's like you push away all desires, like you have no attachments to anyone or anything. You try to make everything void of emotion because emotions will lead you down to the dark side of the force. But if you are trying to become one with the force, you would want to balance your emotions with your reason and use both at the same time, right? Whereas the
Mhm.
Sith, on the other hand, go completely purely emotional and passion based. So you can kind of think of them as like hedonists without the pleasures, or the pleasures are much more like goal orientated to like build empires and stuff like that. Like they get their pleasure from that sort of thing, but
Mhm.
want to use that emotion completely to dominate the force rather than become one with it. So it's like you in broad strokes were there, but in the nerdum of Star Wars, you could start to point out flaws within both schools of thought.
Mhm.
Mhm. I'd co-sign that. Yeah. And I like to when some fans will talk about the Jedi and the Sith, less of Jedi and the Sith and more of just force sensitive characters, that they're just characters that can tune into it, and then they're kind of their own actors, so they kind of manipulate it one way or the other. I will say that in the Tao, yin and yang lack a certain evil element. So, like when we think of the Sith, we think they're pretty evil. If you were to be a bit more purist and try to align them with yin yang, then it'd be like what you were saying, Nick. Like neither is really good or bad. It's really just two sides of the same coin doing what they do to balance things, kind of.
Yeah, it's like a cathode and an anode on a battery, right? One has a positive charge,
Totally.
one has a negative charge.
How do
So
you know
yeah,
those words? Yeah, that just,
oh,
I'm
I
impressed.
don't.
Cathode? I never.
Yeah, it's just the points of a battery. Yeah, one is negatively charged, one is positively charged. That doesn't have any sort of moral assumption about it. It's just the way it is. The same thing with like the concept of yin and yang. And if you really wanted to take a more meta analysis of Star Wars, that would be the concept of the Force as well. Whereas like like where the Sith or the dark, quote unquote, dark side is that sort of negatively charged energy. Um, that
Mhm.
I mean, like there are plenty of characters in the extended universe who utilize dark side powers but aren't bad, you
Mm.
know.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't necessarily want to get into the nitty gritty about Lucas lore. So yeah, no, I know what you.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, but I love it because if anything comes to mind, do speak up because I want to talk a little bit now about how we've seen the force be used. And so again, we're going to get to the plants. I know listeners are really eager to hear about the plants. But first, we want to just break it down as far as like how the force can be harnessed. So the first thing that came to mind, at least for me, was telekinesis, which is defined as the ability to move objects at a distance by mental power or other non-physical means. I put emphasis on the or. Um, and I was thinking about, scenes in Star Wars where you see that happening. I don't know. I'm thinking about like Rey when she's meditating and all the like rocks lift up, right? Like
Or force push or force pull. Yeah.
force push and pull. Good ones, good ones. And yeah, and outside of the Star Wars universe, telekinesis can be shown as like Carrie. You see it in Stranger Things. You see it in Dr. Jean Grey from X-Men. And it's funny. Scientists recently have begun to explore the possibility of brain implants or sensors being used to detect users' intent and manipulate energy fields. Starting out, for example, like patients who are learning to control prosthetics, that you can have the brain impulses affect something external, which I thought was kind of cool, except for the fact that like telekinesis is supposed to have other non-physical means. So I mean, maybe like if it uses like Bluetooth or something, it might count. Do you think?
I think
I
it
don't know,
would be
is it
called
like
technokinesis.
Ooh, I
sounds
like
like
that.
sounds like a music. It sounds like a genre.
Yes,
It
it
sounds
does.
like what they were listening to in Zion, in the Matrix.
Right? Yeah.
That's techno. Get it on.
um, I mean, it has to be non-physical. Is electrical part of the physical?
Yeah, kind of. I don't know. I mean, if it has like a physical receiver and sender thing, maybe not. But I do like what Nick said was about technokinesis.
It's like a
Um,
remote control car.
yeah, exactly. And I ask a little bit about that because getting back to telekinesis, it's either moving objects with mental power or other non-physical means. If non if other non-physical means is a placeholder for the force, then that really just means that there could be stuff that people can tap into, but we just haven't named it yet, right?
A
Yeah,
non-physical means also means electricity.
or
Hmm.
simulation type. There, you get to the idea that someone's just moving an object in local space, right? Something
Right.
just appears up in the air with no like real rules, or I guess hacking to the rules behind the hologram behind that little veil.
Absolutely. Or like other non-physical means, you could have like an alien friend and somehow you can ask them like, "Hey Bob, transport a shoe here," and they would do it. It's non-physical because the alien can use telekinesis. Well, I guess if you're using anyway, I'm getting lost in the mud.
It would be like a higher dimensional being, right? Moving stuff in this dimension.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Perfect. And it would count because we can't really figure it out. But what I mean to imply is that like there could still be something else there. And I started wondering about telekinesis specifically because it seems less special when you start to imagine that there's other explanations for it. And telekinesis seems to be like a placeholder.
It's by far the best superpower, aside
True.
from telepathy. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
All right.
it's just what technology, what science does, right? You start to demystify everything. And through that process of demystification, that mystified thing becomes less special.
Exactly. Like cell phones, if you went back to 500 BCE, would be like a form of witchcraft or something like that. Absolutely. Well, moving on to other force powers, would you agree that you could also have telepathy, which is the idea of communicating thoughts and ideas, or maybe even tricking minds? So, like we've seen, what's his name? Like the decrepit character.
Decrepit?
Yeah, like
I
he's been
swear
dying
you've
for
never seen
7
Star
episodes.
Wars.
What's his it's on the tip of my tongue. Palpatine? Palpatine. Emperor Palpatine.
Or
Yes,
you
Oh, you
could have
him.
should
just
call
said
him.
Obi-Wan. These aren't the droids you're looking for.
You should have called him Emperor Papyrus.
Yeah.
Would have fit in with our plat theme.
Oh, well, yeah, no, that's a good idea. Nick, can you redo the graphic and we'll just put it
Sure.
just
Yeah.
mid-show. But yeah, no, but he ends up putting the thoughts of Rey in I am blanking on
We don't
everybody's names.
acknowledge the sequels here. Just go with Obi-Wan Kenobi saying these aren't the droids you're looking for.
Wait, they made sequels?
You're right. Exactly. No, they didn't.
Oh, man, that would be really great if they did, right?
It wouldn't it? Imagine how awesome it would be.
Mhm.
And just keep that in your mind.
Okay, cool. But that's cool, right? It's the idea that like not only can you like read other minds and maybe like communicate non-verbally, but you can also, I guess like influence another consciousness, perhaps. Okay.
Jedi mind tricks.
Jedi mind tricks. Thank you. That's yes, mind tricks. Yeah, and then another thing that I thought was a force power was precognition, like yeah, like foresight, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could argue that that's why Luke and Anakin were such great pilots because they knew what was going to happen before it happened.
I like that. Yeah,
I
I
think
like that.
there's a thing where like what is it? Like Yoda says the future's hard to tell because it's always shifting, it's always foggy or something like that. Like some sort of like weather-based metaphor or something.
Well, yeah, and force powers like precognition also imply time travel of information. So if it's a short distance, your reliability probably goes up, like fighting a fighter pilot. But if you try to get the future 100 years, there's just so much variability, it wouldn't be reliable at that point, which I kind of like.
Yeah, yeah, I like it too. I mean, you just kind of see like that sort of stuff when you use instinct when you're driving, right? Or when you're doing anything that could be dangerous to avoid small little mishaps. There's points where it's like
Yes.
it looks like this person's gonna cut me off, or I just have this feeling, and so you change the way you operate that vehicle and you don't get into an accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or sometimes too, like implicit memory, like your subconscious can react to stuff before your conscious mind even realizes it. And you could argue that the subconscious is less muddy and thus better able to get that intuition, that foresight going.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess harder to pull from any sort of in like a direct sort of way, right? I guess like in a very like purposeful way. Usually your subconscious just presents stuff to you.
Oh, right. Because we're talking about harnessing force power. Yeah, no, I totally see that.
Yeah,
Well,
I want to go Sith side. I just want to reach into my subconscious and start using stuff.
that would be dope. I mean, if I could dig around in there, I'm sure I would be a lot smarter. That's for sure. It's a lot of stuff I forget. But no, I have another. This could be debatable, but like, can you use the Force to teleport? Again, I know Nick, you said don't use the newer ones, but I mean, like when.
No,
How did he do
the
that?
Force.
How?
To quote the great Han Solo, that's not how the Force works. All right, it just. I don't know. I don't know. I don't like this concept that the Force can just be whatever you want it to be.
Right,
There
right.
needs to be some sort of parameters there.
Good, good. Well, we're getting to the what would a purist say about what works and what counts and what doesn't count, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I just don't think that the Force needs to be utilized for teleportation when they have light speed, and it would seem that they could have the technology for teleportation if that was possible in the first place. So,
Yeah.
assuming that they haven't invented a teleporter in Star Wars universe, it's not possible.
I love how salty you
just-
get.
We're just gonna
Yeah.
look over to all the life forms or lack of life forms in between star systems
Yeah.
that would
Right.
be able to build a force link from point A to point Z.
I do like the idea of a force sling. Is that like a slingshot using
Link.
force? Oh, link.
Force link.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like force sling way better. Personally. But okay, so that's okay. So teleportation kind of out. What about, and this doesn't have a name, but whatever the hell Princess Leia did when she was totally blasted and then like floated back to safety?
That was a force pull.
What?
Just using telekinesis. Yeah. So like a lot of people are dumb and they think that Carrie Fisher was flying through space. No, she was just using force pull. Although I contest that she could use that in the first place. We weren't actually shown that she had any abilities. But yes, in her last ditch effort to survive, she force pulled herself towards the ship.
The shit.
And since there's no gravity, then it looks like she's flying.
That was a weird scene.
Was.
But I like that you said it was kind of prompted by survival. Again, getting into plants in a little bit. So much of air force manipulation is for survival. But just to round out kind of force powers, did I miss anything? Are there any force powers that you add?
Do you don't know about the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Enlighten me,
What a
Nicholas. Enlighten
tragedy.
me.
With the tragedy, yeah. Well, no, I mean it's a big storyline in the prequels where Anakin is looking for that sort of Lazarus pit of being able to bring people back from the dead because he's worried that Padme is going to die because he's having nightmares about her dying, and so he goes to Palpatine, and Palpatine brings up the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, who got to a point where he was able to resurrect himself through the Force. Yeah.
Damn.
So resurrection.
Yeah, resurrection. Okay.
Apparently.
There's still like force heals and all that. How far in the universe do you want to go?
I just like Nick's I guess resurrection. Long pause.
I guess. Again, we're just like real fast and loose with what the Force is and can do.
Right.
It really just started off as instinct and being able to move shit with your mind, and then it became like all of this other weird shit.
I mean, like the telepathic powers and the influence powers are close to reality still, right? People have influential powers.
Yeah, no, I don't have an issue with that, but then you get into resurrection and prolonged life, and
what about if you're so angry
solving
you can
world
live
hunger.
forever?
Yeah,
Solving world hunger. Yeah, there's a lot to be stated about that stuff, but I think you did it. You did a good enough job.
All right, good enough is what I aim for. Let's see.
Yeah, hey, don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. Be the enemy of good enough.
Yes, to all the listeners, don't try to be perfect. It's not worth it. It's really not. Not to be like sounding bitter, but no, just shy of perfection.
I say
if
stop.
only there was 6,000 years of mythology that told us that. Newsflash, Ayla says, don't try to be perfect. It doesn't work. Really?
I say let's evolve.
8:38.
Let the chips fall where they may.
Says the one who's just hanging in by the claw. Just let it fall. Okay. Jedi or Sith? If you could only harness one aspect of the Force, and if you were going to lean it in one way or the other, do either of you have a preference?
Well, obviously the Sith have the best powers. That's not fair.
But is it? Because wouldn't having more power take you away from the purity of the Force?
No, but you just said if you could have one subset of abilities. I'm not saying that I would like to be a Sith. I'm saying they have the best powers.
Yeah,
as long as you can control your emotions and use them in battle, it would be. You can be socially light side, but combat wise dark side. It's just how you manage your emotions.
Mace Windu.
Exactly it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and I do want to just point out too, Nicholas, you used to know a lot about Jedi types and lightsaber colors. Anything we should touch on there in terms of how that relates to kind of the type of Jedi a person would be?
Well, each color is supposed to symbolize a certain aspect of proficiency. So, blue is a lightsaber expert, somebody who's good with swordsmanship. Green is somebody who practices more in the Force. So, you think about Yoda; he does a lot of telekinesis. Obviously, red is the synthetic color of the Sith. Then you have shades in between. Blue, green, and red are really the main ones. But then you have purple because Samuel L. Jackson wanted to stand out in a movie. And
True.
Yeah. Then you have Heartsbane, which is a light pink, which is used by Darth Bane. But yeah, they get into the extended universe stuff, and then you have different gradations, and then you have the dark saber, and then you have a white lightsaber, which is Ahsoka Tano. Yeah, it gets a little bit convoluted, but the original three were blue, green, and red. Blue for swordsmanship, green for Force abilities, and then red for the Sith.
For the most part, in the originals, reds, I believe too, they were only for Jedi that fell to the dark side, because the Emperor doesn't use a lightsaber. I think he even refers to it as a Jedi weapon. So there is like this
Ah.
minuscule bit of an idea that dark side Force users didn't need any swordsmanship because the power was all in the Force.
It's all in those lightning fingers, baby.
Yeah.
You don't need a lightsaber when you can shoot lightning at people.
Good point. Add that to the list. Lightning fingers. All right, good. Okay, good. Well, and we could talk about Star Wars and the Jedi Order and all this good stuff for days, but bringing it to the plants are where it's at. Let's talk about some plants in action using the Force, because these were some really interesting things that I've read and I kind of found. So I wanted to share some of those. But I'll just start with a Neil deGrasse Tyson quote that says, "We are all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically," which was kind of cool, right? Like atomically. Because you think about it, I mean, just we're atoms and there's all this space.
Automatically.
Like atomically.
Yeah, no, I know.
Oh, okay. For a second, I was like, did I read that wrong? No, because like earlier, I thought it said anatomically, and I was like, that's not right. And then I like looked again. I was like, oh, it's atomically. It's like atoms, basically. Atomically, yes. That's how it should be pronounced. I was trying not to say anatomically because that's exactly what was in my head. But
Atomi Mycelium.
Are we just going for all the puns here? What's happening?
Just repronouncing it over.
Atomi Kale. I like that. That's a good one. But okay, so are plants tapped into the Force? I say yes. There's a Goop article.
All right.
Okay.
And we're done.
It was great. Great talk, folks.
Yep,
I'm going to go get a cigarette.
Okay, so this Goop article, they talk about connecting to plant energy. There's just a quick quote that said, "Plants help us remember our nature because they hold all the elements within them, just as we do. They're holding the sun, the water, the fire, and the earth, and we are too." I don't know who said that. I can share the article link. It doesn't really have anything to matter with anything. Yeah.
Do not share Goop. We do not
Goop
share
free
that.
zone.
Yeah, this is a Goop free zone.
Hey, I like some of their articles. They have some good stuff that they put out. But I like this little
like a beauty company. Never mind. Continue.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Gwyneth Paltrow's like magazine.
Did she name the magazine after the other company, or did she name the other company after the magazine?
Wait,
The magazine is made after the company. Yeah.
I don't care.
She has a company called Goop.
I don't care. And they sell they sell fine
Candles.
Variety of snake oils
and vaginal candles.
Vaginal candles. That's right.
It's like the Annabelle Porter character in Parks and Recreation, where where she was talking about the hottest new trends, and she's like, beef milk. Locally raised beef milk, and they're just like, it's fucking milk. What are you talking about?
Anyway, and as I was reading through stuff, I did like this quote because it's true. Plants are holding a lot of elementals, so to speak, and plants have been around for 500 million years. And you start to wonder, they've been around a lot longer than us. They've seemed to have evolved in a way that is more efficient than we have. It's not that there's not a lot of effort on the part of a plant, but there's something else going on there.
Well, they're just raising us for food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They live far longer than us. We die, and then we become their fertilizer.
Haha, then we invented coffins, motherfucker. No, I'm just kidding.
Coffins only last.
And then we cut them down and surround ourselves in plant in order to not be eaten by the plants.
They don't last forever. They degrade.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of the happening vibes from the plants in my room right now.
Concrete.
And some people use concrete.
Yeah.
I don't see how
Why do you think the pharaohs put themselves in tombs, man? They knew. They didn't want the plants eating them.
And then in the 1900s, everyone's like, let's take mummy juice.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, the
right.
Victorians ate them instead.
All part of the Force, because the Victorians pooped them out, and that poop helped the plants. It's all beautiful. Well, one of the things I wanted to start with was like plants are kind of the perfect vehicle to study the Force in action because oftentimes when you think about like the Tao or like you were saying, Mike, there's no way to describe this, and if you try, you fail. What that really is saying is like our human brain, like the brain as a tool, or linguistics or intellectualism, it's failing. And when you have a plant, it doesn't have a brain per se, but it does have some other type of intelligence. And I think that it's like the purest kind of form of existence, and it's a great.
Do you think plants are conscious?
Yeah, I think so. There's a guy, he's director of the International Laboratory of Plant Neurobiology in Florence. It's a mouthful. And he said today's view of intelligence as the product of a brain, in the same way. What? I think this quote is missing stuff. Okay, but in a nutshell, he's talking about intelligence, and he's talking about the brain as an organ, like a kidney. And he's like, that brain-based intelligence is an oversimplification. A brain without a body produces the same amount of intelligence of the nut that it resembles. Why did I put that? Does that make sense to you guys? That made sense
It
to me
sounds like
yesterday.
it sounds like a brain in a jar type theory.
Yeah, kind of. I think what he's trying to say is that, well, there's other quotes I have from him, but he basically talks about how plants do have an intelligence, but it's not tethered to a brain, which makes us think it's lower than us. But in all actuality, it could even be on par or better than us.
We have a cerebral centric idea of consciousness.
That's
So
well said.
yeah, so we think that the only things that can have a true consciousness are things with big brains. That's why we, look at ourselves. We look at apes. We look at dolphins. We look at whales. Not whales as much, but elephants. Even dogs. I think dogs are about maybe cats. Cats are about the smallest brains that we consider conscious. And then
Yeah.
everything else, just isn't conscious. It's not allowed to be.
Well, yeah, and
Until you start looking at root networks of plants and
Right.
how they feel
Right.
certain things. And
we're getting there. We are going to get there, sir. Well, and because you were listing off some mammals, Nick, recently they've started to include a lot of birds for their problem-solving abilities. And
But
so
birds don't have souls, so.
How dare you?
No, they did. They definitely don't
you went
have
there.
souls,
I know
dude.
what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about.
Dare you?
Yeah. So, well, this guy, this researcher said intelligence is the ability to solve problems, and plants are amazingly good in solving their problems. So I'm reminded of that Rogue One quote: "I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me." Okay. I think that's kind of the way that plants operate, because they do face a lot of problems that animals do: finding energy, reproducing, staving off predators. But they totally developed a completely different approach. And I'd argue that approach is a bit force dependent, kind of, sorta. So shall I go into some examples of plants being force sensitive and having foresight, et cetera, or did you guys have anything to add at this point?
No, go ahead.
Awesome. Okay. So, force sensitive. Now, humans have 5 basic senses. We agreed on that. Scientists have recently discovered that plants have at least 20 different senses that are used to monitor complex conditions within their environment. They have senses that roughly correspond to our 5, but also have additional ones that can do things such as measure humidity, detect gravity, sense electromagnetic fields, etc., etc. And I thought that was kind of cool because earlier when we were talking about the Force and how it's this unknown or unseen kind of thing, couldn't it just be that it is some sense that we don't have the ability to actually feel? Or put another
Of
way,
course.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay.
Butterflies can see in ultraviolet light. We can't. I mean,
Right.
just because we can't see something doesn't mean it exists. It doesn't
It
exist.
doesn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so couldn't it be that the force is there? It's just that, like, yeah, like you said, we can't access it, but somehow we sometimes can. So you have instances of like precognition, you have the experiments where people tap into the ether, assuming that's all valid and true and stuff. Those anomalies lead me to believe that, yeah, we are brain based and we focus on the brain. But if we take it back into the consciousness, that's the thing that we have in common with the plants that can sense all these different things. And so I've just been thinking a lot about consciousness, and we'll loop back to kind of this in a little bit. But do you think that being able to sense the force is something tangible or is it intangible? Midichlorian, not midichlorian, etc. You know what I mean? Like, is it something that you access or is it something that you have?
Well, I mean,
Like a sense perception.
they're getting into like empirical evidence or instinct, and I think that if you're talking about something that's already by its nature intangible, then it's going to be hard to look at something with it, look at something like that and get empirical data from it. I mean, if you want to measure something like weak, nuclear force or strong nuclear force, you can, or electromagnetic force. There are different types of forces that we can measure. But if we're talking about this overarching thing, then I think that becomes a little bit more abstract and probably something that is more intuitive than um, you know, uh, data driven.
Mm. Could it be something that is the product of connected consciousness? So something that you have to engage in some sort of a linkage with other minds in order to access?
Well, I mean, you get into the concept of the internet, right? That's what the
Mhm.
internet is. Just a collection of minds putting their energy and their attention into a digital space that then creates some sort of alternate reality. But yeah, I mean, I think that it would probably do best to have some sort of linkage, although I do subscribe to the sort of holographic universe model in which that like each individual thing is its own hologram maker, and those hologram makers can connect with each other to gain more functionality, obviously. But I
Hmm.
think it kind of reminds me of the concept of, and I think we've talked about this before, but the concept of animism being one of the original sort of religions. Early humans believed that everything on this earth had its own sort of life force, its own sort of essence.
Mhm.
You think about the concept of like mountains being alive, or rocks, or rivers, or oceans having their own sort of life force and essence. So, yeah, you could think about them as little, as their own hologram generators, and connecting them creates an energetic grid or an earth.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, anything to add? Feeling good?
Um, I mean, so we're asking if there's enough sensors for one thing or multiple things connected together to be able to define this overarching force.
Mhm.
All right. I mean, if we can build all those sensors out and we can have a discrete amount, because it sounds like the force isn't one thing, but the multitude of variables that create one like single scalar value, right? Like one single
Mhm.
notion of the force that gets broken down into these other things that we don't have sensors yet to pick up. Um, I would hope in the future that there would be enough cybernetic augmentations, both individually and collectively, that we would be able to pick it up and understand it in the same way that we understand anything else that we can measure
And
in a
wouldn't that
very easy way.
well, yeah, and wouldn't that be some shit though? Because, like, pardon my French, but we evolved to have bigger brains because that was useful to us. And somehow that took us out of nature and the animist beliefs. And now through digital connectivity, we're trying to relink back into that digitally, even though like you were talking about the trees, and we'll get to this in a minute, but like trees have really incredible linkage systems that are completely natural and span like decades.
I mean, it makes sense if you look at like sort of the consequences of the Enlightenment, right? Like we dropped all sorts of any sort of spirituality or like faith-based ideas, and for good reasons, I suppose, right? For probably out of like psychological trauma of the Dark Ages. But it does make sense that we'd return back to sort of these ancient mythologies that were kind of hinting at a deeper scientific truth, right? Because like if the quantum side of things are true, then things in the future can influence things that were stated in the past. So maybe things in the future were laying the groundwork in forms of mythical stories, and that's where we kind of start, and we'll eventually get back to the point where we can see it all working together. But right now we only have partial pieces of this overall overall story of being, I guess.
The fabric of reality, yeah, the force, whatever it is that is, yeah, it's like impossible to grasp, but it's there. Well, this is great. And this gets into the next smaller section about foresight. There was a study that talked about roots altering course before they hit an obstacle, showing that the plants were actually capable of seeing an obstacle through their many senses, which I just thought was cool, like
Where's
when
a
we
plant's brain? Is it in the root system?
well,
I mean,
yeah,
I
kind
know
of,
that we're
sort of.
talking using the term brain very loosely here, but like,
Mhm.
where are the neurons or whatever plants would have that are a facsimile of neurons?
They are trying to figure that out. There's I kind of wish I did this in reverse, but I'll talk a little bit about this plant. Actually, yeah, let's go do it in reverse. Let's go down to page.
Is it the mycelium?
No, I'm going to start with the smaller case example. Now let's go back to the mycelium. You're right, because you're talking about like the brain. That's the root system. So yeah, so we'll get into telepathy and mind tricks or tricking minds. So plants are wonderful communicators. They share a lot of information with neighboring plants or with other organisms. Many plants will even warn others of their species when danger is near. If attacked by an insect, a plant will send a chemical signal to their fellows as if to say, hey, I'm being eaten, so prepare your defenses. So I think, Nick, in that case, it's not a brain, it's like a chemical
Chemical
signal.
reaction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also wondering too, because like I'm sure you're going to talk about the mycelium network.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that plants are just nodes or little receptors for the fungi organism? Is the fungi organism really behind all of it?
Dude, okay, yeah, no, I know. I know. It's like, are the fungi, like, I don't know. Okay, let's get into it. So
Mhm.
there's a researcher, she's in Canada, and I think she was like a forester, and then she got really concerned by the logging efforts, and she started doing research about trees and tree knowledge and tree communication. And so she was looking at birches and firs, and she did this weird experiment where she got a couple chemicals. One was CO2, some was nitrogen, just different injectables. And she had about 80 different trees that she was working with. Some of the trees she would give an abundant amount of CO2. Other trees she would deprive of sunlight. Other trees, and she just kind of went through either stressing or supporting the trees. And then she went back with a Geiger-meter. It's something where you can kind of like measure stuff. I didn't really get too far into it, but you can look her up. I will try to find her name somewhere. It's Simard. Susan Simard. And that's Susan with a Z. So Suzanne Simard. So she measures these trees and kind of tries to figure out, like, okay, how much CO2 is represented across these 10 trees, some of which I deprived of CO2, some of which I supported it. And when she was looking at these, she got this sense that like the trees were helping one another. And she checked 80 different replicas, and there was this really lively two-way conversation, as if one of the trees was saying, hey, can I help you? And then another tree is like, yeah, can you send me some of your carbon? And this would be across two different species of trees, so a fir and a birch. And it turns out that at that time of year in the summer, the birch trees were sending way more carbon to the fir trees than the fir trees were sending back to the birch. So it wasn't like this constant, like trees just give off a constant amount. It was gradated to the situation of the receiving tree. And in later experiments, she found the opposite to be true, that you could redirect the distribution of carbon through the root system, depending on what was happening above the tree level. And so it turns out that the two species, were really interdependent, and they leaned on one another for support, sending messages through this unseen force until she, dived a little bit deeper. So Nick had mentioned you say the word better than I do. What is it?
Mycelium?
Mycelium, yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm transitioning to my Apple computer because my PC doesn't want to show me the pictures. But basically, you have your basic tree. There's a root system underneath it. Often near trees, you will find different types of mushrooms and fungal guys. You have the mycorrhiza, which is fungus and root. So the root systems from the fungi and the root systems of the trees start to connect. And what ends up happening is there's a trade of carbon and nutrients. The mushroom even codes the soil particles, and there can be hundreds of kilometers of mycelium a single footstep. So these are
Mm.
really, really dense systems, and it's really incredible. So I'll stop there for a second. Any thoughts about that? Just
Yeah, well, they say that the largest living organism is in the Pacific Northwest. It's the mycelium network.
mhm.
It's all the old growth forests have a network of fungi that act as like a spider web that connects each plant and their root system together like a giant net. And so
Yeah,
that mycelium has been dubbed the largest living entity on Earth.
that's pretty cool. I didn't know that. That's
Mhm.
it's hella cool. Freaking trees, man.
Fucking
Um,
fungi, man. It's
fucking
freaky.
fungi.
It's freaky. They act as like the bootstraps of plants. Plants are just organs to the fungus. The fungus is what's like sending the electrical impulses. It's like the connecting network to everything.
You would think that, wouldn't you?
I
But
do.
let us talk about hub trees. Have you heard about hub trees?
No.
Okay. So I have a picture, which you guys can't see if you're listening to this, but it's about mycorrhizal networks with nodes and linkages. So, like Nick was talking about, imagine a bunch of circles on a page. Some circles are bigger than others, and those big circles are connected to smaller circles and even smaller circles. There's just like lines all over the place. And the lines represent these root systems, these really complicated networks and freeways of information. And you're going to see, so the image that I have, it's actually based on a mapping of this specific area in Canada. And what they noticed is that some trees gave off more CO2 than other trees. So they have a way to like measure. What do? They sorted the sequences of DNA for a selection of trees. There were interlinking fungal highways or linkages. And the darkest nodes, so these would be the big circles, those represented the busiest nodes. These were called hub trees or mother trees that nurtured their young. A mother tree could be connected to hundreds of other trees in its network. And often they observed that those hub trees would reduce their root composition to kind of make elbow room for neighboring baby trees that needed more space for their roots to grow. Uh,
Okay.
which I just thought was just fabulous.
Yeah, but it's
Using
only possible through the fungi. That's what I'm saying.
well, oh, well, but also the fungi there's a two-way relationship. So the fungi get, I think, CO2 from the trees, and the trees get nutrients and information from the fungi, or the
Mhm.
fungi translate between interspecies of trees. I mean, I'm just
Yes.
throwing that out there, but I do think that there's something where, like, yeah, like the mushroom has a supportive role less than like a
The
Sith
mushroom's the
role.
internet of plants.
Yes, there it is. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, yeah. And yeah, totally. And what was cool was that, like, using isotope tracers, they were able to notice that the mother trees would send their excess carbon um, to nearby seedlings. And specifically, if a mother tree was starting to die, they would actually increase messages of wisdom, so to speak, to the next generation of seedlings. I don't know how they measured this. I kind of like ran out of time, but what she was saying is that, like, they studied this and that the seedlings around a dying mother tree were 4 times more likely to survive than the seedlings around a non-dying mother tree, which is to say that, like, it, as it was dying, it was releasing information to help those new trees guard against, like, bark beetles and, you know, like drought or whatever. It just made them hardier. And the implication was that these trees are actually talking to one another
I
without
wonder if they're just
speech.
clones, though. I wonder if they're just clones, and since they're linked through the mycelium, and just download, like, the mother tree dies, and then all of the little seedlings become that mother tree, and
Hmm.
they contain all the information that the mother tree experienced. You know what I mean?
I don't know. Well, I know that they were tracking the DNA. So if they were clones, I'm sure they would have found that through the
Mhm.
sequencing, right? Because I would imagine clone DNA would be like exactly the same versus like varied DNA of like a, yeah, like a seedling of a mother tree.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I definitely want to go to those ancient forests. I've been wanting to go for forever, because I do feel like there's got to be something like a vibe, especially when you think about people who like to earth, which is to walk barefoot on dirt. If you were to walk barefoot on top of all of those root systems, be kind of interesting. I don't know. Be a
Mhm.
good thing to try, I think.
That's how you get a
Well,
parasite.
yes.
Yeah, true.
Sometimes good parasites, though. You can also get microbes and stuff like that. They're good. It's good. It's decent. Like. But yeah, no, I think it's incredible, the mycology and the sort of the network of mycelium that acts as like the telephone for plants. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's like in the same way that we invented the internet to communicate with each other across the world. Trees have been doing that since fucking Jump Street.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
actually, basically, literally Jump Street, because trees came after mycelium. Mycelium was here before almost all plant life.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
far more
Yeah.
visceral though. It'd be like they can feel each other's pain
Hmm.
for long distances.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was
Imagine
another
the
thing.
horror of a forest fire, then, right?
Oh god.
Mhm. We can go do our own studies and like burn down a mother tree and see what happens.
Oh man, that's so.
Ancient mother
Never.
tree.
I'm not a vegan. I don't do that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one
Plants
against
are
vegans right
friends.
there.
Yep.
They
You
like to
took
think
away
that
my
they're so high
punchline.
and mighty, man. I'm telling you.
And then
Well,
you
my
find out that
punchline at the end of this was gonna be, "Take that, vegans."
Yeah.
Make a shirt
no,
out of it.
Once they create a modulator that gives like plants an actual voice, like they could put like a little box on it, man, the
your little
commercials for
plant screams.
anti-veganism are going to be amazing.
Yep.
I love it. I love it.
So
Well,
funny. Just because you can't talk doesn't mean they don't feel anything.
and, like, they're talking it up, like, they
Yeah.
have full gossip, like, columns all over the place. Well, yeah, and so looking at, now getting away from trees and just thinking about plants, plants in their own way are little complex communicators. So most commonly they will use chemical volatiles. So, just like chemicals release, like we were talking about earlier, if they're being eaten, they'll be like, this is happening over here. Protect yourselves. um, and then scientists have also discovered that plants communicate via electrical signals and even vibrations. So instead of a single powerful brain, plants have millions of tiny computing structures that work together in a complex network, which he compares to the internet, like you were saying. And the strength of this evolutionary choice is that it allows a plant to survive even after losing close to 90% or more of its biomass, which is kind of cool. So, having a single brain like ours, just like having a single heart or a pair of lungs, would make plants easier to kill because they're part of a network. They're a little hardier. And that's why they've adapted to have no brain, not because they're not intelligent, but because they would be more vulnerable. The same researcher also said that he recorded the same signals given off from different parts of the plant that matched those from neurons in animal brains. So I don't know what kind of signals those were. I should have probably read that a little closer, but case in point, there's stuff happening with plants, and so much of it hasn't been observed until more recently, and so much of it does have freaky force power leanings to it, I would argue. Let's see. I already read that one. Oh, yeah. And so in the last several decades, science has been showing that plants are endowed with feeling. They weave complex social relations. They communicate with themselves and with animals. And you can argue that there are some plants that show behaviors similar to sleeping and playing, which I thought was pretty cool. And looping it back to that quote that I shared in the beginning, our brains do not make us more conscious. They make us differently conscious. We are just one expression of consciousness in a potentially infinite matrix of intelligence. So I have to ask myself, let's say the internet's not a thing. What would humans be able to tap into that could connect all of us? Would it be consciousness? And is that something that we've lost? That ability to group think, even though we haven't lost it, because you have group think and you have Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell's book about how you have hive mind thinking, even in humans today, but it's not harnessed, I guess.
Well, you can think about it in the animal world, right? It's like what the law of 100 or something like that. It's like once 100 animals in a certain species learn a particular thing, every animal in the world that is that species learns it. Like there's a weird thing that happens with animals across like vast distances where, you could have a tribe of monkeys learn how to use a particular stick to get this grub out of a log. And then 1,000 miles away, another tribe of monkeys, which is the same species, will also learn that thing.
Dude, that's just like if you have the idea for a book and then, another person has an idea for a book and then pretty soon the book's published and you're like, damn. And then you see all these comments of people, I was going to write that book. And you're like, damn.
Yeah.
It's like LinkedIn. Okay, so if you're LinkedIn, would that be somehow forcey kind of? I don't know. I mean,
Well, we've talked about this before with the collective unconscious and all of the concepts of like the fifth dimension and meditation and sort of getting back to that state of, the animal or plant state where you're out in nature or you're out and having a quiet moment, tapping into that sort of matrix of energy. That's where people get, an inspiration and what the Greeks called the muses. Like, you spend a quiet moment and you realize that thoughts are coming to you, from the ether. So yeah, I mean, if you quiet your mind down, then you can have access to a whole bevy of ideas and concepts that you may not be privy to if you're constantly distracting your mind.
I like that. And it reminds me of we were talking about something. It was that quantum experiment where they had a light. What did they have? They had a light that would spin around in a circle, and they put a plant that needs light in one corner. And so statistically, you would just imagine that the light would rotate in a very even distribution
It was
in
set to a
order.
random number generator, so it would point at
Yeah,
random points in the room. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. And so what happened was when they put the plant in there, it started to skew towards the plant. Presumably because the plant was like, come over here, think about me, you know, and it's like there's some sort of quantum entanglement happening. And so I started thinking about like telekinesis and the force. And I was thinking like, oh gosh, you know, like if you get enough plants, could they prompt some force power? I don't know, bit of a stretch, but I thought that was kind of a fun thing.
Well, why do you think you feel so different when you're in nature over a
Mhm.
long enough time
Yeah,
versus,
Yeah.
say,
right.
sitting in a city?
Forest bathing, no, absolutely, especially
With
because,
some
huh?
telepathy going on from the plants to you.
Yeah.
Oh, creepy.
Best change
Creepy.
in the
I
way you
like
feel
it.
and think.
Jedi
When
mind
humans,
tricks.
and humans have done the hive mind thing for a long time. I mean, outside of like the book publishing stuff, I mean, you see it like with calculus. You don't need an internet. The internet's like the technical, more like the technology based manifestation of what we've been doing forever, right?
Well said.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, you get enough people together in a tight enough space and leave them alone. Don't bother them. Like, kind of insulate them and isolate them. That they'll start to think very similarly, and anybody else who thinks differently will be ostracized or killed. So humans do the same thing. It's just, I guess, with our ideas and not so much our physical experiences, like
Hmm.
plants do, as far as like feeling when they're being eaten and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I thought it was interesting because like this telepathy that the plants have really generates from this underground structure. And I started wondering to myself, yeah, like what would be the physical manifestation of a human linkage? I guess you're right. Like that's the internet, but like it just doesn't seem natural. Or maybe it is the natural progression. I don't know. I mean,
Humans have always had this issue that for some reason, whatever we've created is unnatural. If we were created naturally, then shouldn't it follow that the things we create are naturally? We don't say like when bees create a beehive that the beehive is unnatural to the rest of the world, right? But even though it's still a structured, organized thing that doesn't exist on its own, you need bees to make a beehive. So why is it so strange that whenever humans make something, it's unnatural?
I like that. That's a really well said. Although I do think about the bees that are in the street light in front of my house. That seems a little unnatural because it's a
Ah,
metal hive now.
they just like light, and yeah, they can make hives out of anything. It's now a
No,
natural, unnatural hive.
got it. Got it. No, I mean, I think that's like really well said, you know, because I mean, this reading about these crazy plants really made me think a lot about stuff because there's this intelligence to them. And this extreme connectivity which we have, it's just not as, I don't know, well defined within the zeitgeist, so to speak, you know. I mean, it's like we keep talking around this stuff and nobody's really hit the nail on the head.
That we're all connected, or that, or
Yeah,
just the way that we're connected. Is that there's not like a biological, physical connection? That it all seems to be psychologically based. That's the
I
problem
mean,
we're wandering
i'm
around.
I think I'm wandering around the force, man. The force.
It's almost
The
like there's
force.
6,000 years of mythology to teach us these things. It's like humans have amnesia. We have a I don't know, it's some sort of pompous amnesia where we think that anybody that was born before us doesn't know as much as we do, and so therefore we have to constantly rediscover the same concepts over and over and over again. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like that's the only argument I would have against the internet as not being quote unquote natural. I think it is natural, obviously, because we're creating it. We're natural beings, but it's a simulacrum of something that was already happening before. And so I just don't. I think it's an imperfect simulation of what we were doing before as humans. Um, and
Mm.
maybe not imperfect is not a good word, but it's just I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but it does seem like humans kind of have this like condition where we're constantly trying to struggle with reinventing the same concepts over and over again, and not really understanding that there seem to be universal truths involved in our reality. Um,
Yeah.
Hey man,
No.
people live their whole lives to get one original idea.
Yeah, and if that, man, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't even know if there's anything as such as a original idea, to be honest.
Right?
No thought.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, and so we might have covered this. I'm just going to read this little section because I started thinking about all this stuff. So, in the unimaginably weird world of subatomic particles, such as electrons, carriers of electric currents, individual particles exist in many places at the same time. It may seem impossible, but experiment after experiment over the last 100 years have proven it to be true beyond a shadow of a doubt. So, electrons in the room you're sitting in right now, like those on your computer, exist in the computer and inside your brain. So, this is where things get really wild. If particles are slightly everywhere and precisely nowhere, then some particles that make up you are inside of you at the same time that they exist on the opposite side of the universe. Undeniably weird, but so what? Well, a quantum, quote, tap, end quote, that originates on the far side of the universe, say an exploding star, could cause a collapse inside your skull. That's what. So your thoughts move the universe outside you a little bit, and the universe moves inside of you, or moves you. So there's this, like, I guess it's entanglement, but
If
on
you
this
can,
really, really tiny level.
if you could do that, like if you could prove that that was the way that you died, that'd be my preferred way to go.
Dude, I know,
Yeah,
right? Well, that's probably what an
by a
aneurysm is, dude.
supernova
Like,
across the galaxy. Yeah.
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 That was my supernova, and my supernova went.
The Mike Nova. Well, yeah, and so I was just thinking about it, like, do you actually feel any of this infinitesimal activity going on? No. But can one person sense a quantum change in their brain caused by a quantum change in someone else's brain? So, how to put this into terms, like,
I think that's
how would
the. I
the
think
sense
that's
be?
the. I think that's the phenomena you're describing. I think that's what exactly happens when you're thinking of a friend. Like you're thinking about calling them. You go to grab your phone to call them, and they call you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like that weird something. And then it's like, so that's on a conscious to conscious level. What about that differently connected consciousness, like a plant? And like you were saying, Mike, you're walking in a forest, all of a sudden you feel real peaceful. Kind of like you want to die in the forest and let the plants eat your dying body. I mean, like, not to say that that's what they're wanting to do, but I mean, like, that influence is kind of interesting.
Yeah. And you don't know why, but you don't want to leave the forest. And like people are dumb, all of those cities are dumb, but you're like, I love being. I think I just want to, even though it's probably like tenfold, orders of magnitude more difficult to live just in the forest by yourself, right? But for some reason, you
Right.
don't want to leave.
And like thousands of people disappear in at least American forests alone every year. Like, look it up. It's like shocking how many people just disappear without a trace in the middle of the forest.
And I think too, those are some of the senses that like animals pick up, right? Like dogs. Like if dogs like you, or like how we say, like if you're good with a dog, then your character is usually good. There might
Yeah.
be some of those extra senses that are picking up, because like I've had dogs that were like one dog that was particularly like was a rescue dog that was bad, but for some reason was completely kind to me, like cool with me. And based off of that, I was pretty sure a decision was made for something that was somewhat important. So it's like I think it's that connection that we have between species too that can
Mhm.
tell an underlying character when it's not two humans with egos and underlying shadows and all that stuff.
So I think what
Yeah,
you're
we're just
saying,
little. Everything on this planet is just a little being throwing electricity at each other, and like we just
yes.
don't like. That's the
Lightning
thing is,
fingers.
yeah. Well, lightning fingers. There you go.
Oh, Jesus.
But it's true. I mean, like we've religions and mythologies have talked about this intangible connection for thousands and thousands of years. I don't understand why we need scientists to tell us that it's fucking true. I mean, like it seems to be even if it's not literally true, it's like metaphorically true, and that should be good enough for us, to
Well,
be
I think
honest.
there's a difference between like knowing and knowing,
And
you
knowing,
know.
yeah, and
Yeah.
knowing under the certain authoritarian, parameters that we accept right now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
I
and
got more.
also
Go for it, Ayla.
oh, I just was gonna say with religion and stuff, like you add in that morality element. We could have thrown all books on ethics and morality out the window when we realized that dogs can sense good people. Pass the dog test. Good, bad, done. Like we could have
Well,
just
that'd be a
skipped
good
all that.
experiment.
Dude, I want to write a little book where like dogs somehow are like widely used throughout society, but for something, like anyway, so
They
alternate
are.
spin-off. No, I know, but I mean like on like this wide scale, like dog DMV, but it's not the DMV, it's like something else where they end up influencing the trajectory of your lives
Oh,
or
are
something.
you saying that the dogs are going to start vetting humans?
Yeah. Yes.
Ah,
Yeah. Wouldn't that be fun for society? And then like, yeah, you come across one salty dog and like it just changes everything. You're like, no, I'm a good person. And they're like, no, dog doesn't say
Death.
it. And
Go straight to the
you failed your
execution chamber.
driving test.
Humans get euthanized based off of dogs.
oh, dude, this one's not good. Take him to the back. Oh, dude.
The Willy
I
Wonka
do
band-aid.
kind of support this concept that plants are the ultimate villains,
Oh,
and that they're secretly just harvesting us for our carbon. I like that.
is that because you watched Gaia?
Yeah, well, that is the literal. Yeah, that is like the literal premise of Gaia. But yeah, it makes sense.
I like it. Well, okay. So the last little experiment about plants that I wanted to talk about was one that illustrates how they live on different time scales than us and animals, moving so slowly that we hardly notice their behavior. So there's a video that I watched. It's really short, like 2 minutes, but it's a little plant and there's a little pole like a foot away from it. And they did this time lapse video, and you can just see how like it grows 3 giant leaves at the base, and then this little stem starts reaching directly towards the pole. I don't know how it knows the pole is there. I don't know. It just keeps reaching for it. The other thing that was interesting when you speed it up is you can see that the base leaves kind of like do flex and stuff. So like when it wants to grow 3 inches to the right, it will pull up its base leaves to give it a little extra grounding. And then it stretches and then it will like open up again and then it grows again. And it just you could just see it really working. Then it gets to the pole. There's a second where they had 2 plants in competition to get to one pole. Once the first plant reached the pole, you could visibly see that the other plant changes course entirely, starts looking for a different pole. And so what was really weird is when they were describing it, they said that they were looking at these plants and they're like, wow, that plant's striving. It's noticing, it's knowing, it's looking. And what I loved is the researcher says these are all metaphorical questions because like it doesn't have a brain. Right? Like, like if you watch the video, you're like, yeah, that plant knows what's up. It's striving. It's aware. But how? Kind of like what you were asking, Nick. How? Especially if it's just one without the mycelium floor, without,
Well,
like other
it probably
influences.
doesn't even need the mycelium. Mycelium is probably just for intercommunication, but I think that plants probably also can just read. You said they have 20 different types of sensors on them, so they can definitely read energies and inputs that we can't see with our eyes and we can't perceive with our senses, like being able to see gravity, or understand gravity, in that sort of, or the measurable differences of gravity, however slight they may be. We can't perceive that.
They don't even need math. They
Right,
skipped
exactly.
algebra or
Well,
whatever. I don't know.
and they
Physics.
tend to follow the golden ratio of growth. So I mean, they are kind of hard coded with mathematics in them already.
Or the
Um,
force.
or the force, universe is just a math equation.
Don't
Um,
make all the math majors like get really excited and it's like, oh, the force is math. Oh God.
yeah. I think my favorite quote on the internet that I've ever read are that trees are just very slow explosions. And I think that is true. Um, but yeah, I mean, like
Aw.
I think plants just have this ability to perceive their surroundings in a way that we can't, and perhaps because they are of no mind, because they don't have a mind, they're
Mhm.
automatically tapped into that sort of absolute, or collective
Nirvana.
unconscious, or whatever you want to call it, that fifth dimensional space that ties all living things together.
And
Yeah.
maybe the trade-off is that they don't get to move, they don't get to have a
Mhm.
brain, they don't get to have certain, now speaking in like an intellectual, like a
Mhm.
hologram where like you get to choose your life before you're born, sort of
Mhm.
thing. You could choose to roll plant,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, if you want to be a plant, you get tapped into the fifth dimension, you get all these crazy sensors, but you
Right.
can't run around and you can't do a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, you don't
Yeah.
have free
Yeah.
motion, but you'll be able to, live forever,
Skill to
and,
pilot.
provided that you don't die. But yeah, I
Yep.
was thinking about this because, we went and visited the sequoias, and General Sherman is up there. And, like
Squishy.
we were, well, yeah, he's very squishy. And we were privileged enough to go on the off season when there were no people enforcing the very strict barrier code that they have,
Oh,
partly because
right.
it was like 10 feet of snow, and so we were walking up the barrier. Um, but I remember, being there in this sequoia forest. I mean, those trees are hundreds and hundreds of years old,
Mhm.
and those tree systems are, like they've seen some things. Like you got to
Yeah.
imagine, if you could be a sequoia, you could live to be like 500 years, and you could see the entire world change before your eyes.
And,
Um,
you were probably a seedling at one point, and you got encoding from a mother tree that was,
mhm.
like, 1,000 years old
Right. So you
or
probably
older.
can look back into the past, like taking
Mhm.
isn't there a concept somewhere in sci-fi where oh yeah, Game of Thrones, of course, the weirwood trees, right?
Ah, yes.
Bran being able to touch the roots of the weirwood trees and see into the past because there were trees back then, and like
Mhm.
all the trees are sharing their prior information. So yeah,
Yeah.
it would be kind of cool, like if trees had that ability to be the archives of the planet.
Well,
I'd sign
they
up.
do in a weird way. Like we count tree rings, right? And then
Yeah.
pull
Yeah.
information from that to be able
Hmm.
to age and understand what this tree saw. But it'd be cool if it was like, yeah, you could like hold on to a tree and then watch a movie of its life and
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
it's saying.
Oh, maybe you can, just touch it and in tune with the mycelium, undergrowth. You never know. Although, well, I don't know. That just made me think. We'll keep anyway.
We've already
Uh,
been able to extract audio from plants, so I mean,
right.
maybe it's only a matter of time before we can extract visuals.
Mm.
Dude, well, and okay, so here's something that's gonna bake your noodle. Nick thinking about trees is like a villain. Well, maybe not just trees, but plants. Plants make up more than 99% of biomass on the planet. So that means that all the world's animals, including like the gazillion ants, the big blue whales, us, we all make less than 1%. And that the most of the biomass on this planet is the plant systems.
That's
And
good.
it's good, but I mean, incredible to think about how much, like when you think about ancestral knowledge and generational knowledge and epigenetics, then you think about plants that have been around for so much longer. I just, things that make you just wonder. This was a delightful episode to put together.
Yeah. You got to get a giant fern, man. Ferns were here way before trees.
Oh, I'll get a fern.
Trees
I'll
are
get
relatively new to the scene, which is interesting. Like,
new to the scene. What if
seriously.
like trees were aliens and like we always thought aliens would be these little like grays or something like that, but really it's a neighborhood friendly tree.
Be a good disguise.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. So let me think. I think I think that's about it. I had some other random notes, but I think that's a good place to kind of start to segue out. Is the Force simply an energetic network that we've yet to explain and quantify? Is focus and intention at the core of that? Aristotle said the energy of the mind is the essence of life. And with Jedi training, they're often meditating or trying to go inwards and things like that. So I don't know, do humans have a few barriers to work through? Can we connect to the Force? Are plants our teachers? One will never know.
Mm. Yeah. Well, and one little fun fact, because I was thinking about this while we were talking. Unpollinated plants glow for bees.
Oh, well, that's
Yeah.
adorable.
So a bee's
Pollinate.
vision, when it flies around, it can see, like, if there's a whole bunch of flowers, it can see the ones that are unpollinated because they glow.
Dude. And bees never sting plants. They just help
No.
them. They're
Yeah,
part of the
plants.
gang.
Quite the intelligent, deceptive creature.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. So go get yourself some plants. You,
Mhm.
whoever's listening to this. And yeah, that's all I got. Unless you want to hear that Julie Morley quote again. It's good stuff.
Yeah, go for it. Why not?
Wrap it
Okay.
up.
All right. So this is what we started out with. Reconsider this. The continuum of intelligence from simpler to more complex organisms does not imply a hierarchy of dominion. Instead, it suggests a branching system of differential intelligence expressed in each species' ability to creatively adapt to the changing circumstances of its particular niche and umwelt. Our brains do not make us more conscious. They make us differently conscious. We are just one expression of consciousness in a potentially infinite matrix of intelligence.
Very nice. All right. Well, thank you, Ayla. That was a fun discussion about the Force and plants.
Yeah.
Two things that I did not think could be bridged together, but you did a good job doing that. So nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. I certainly did myself. Please leave us a comment. What's your favorite plant? I am partial to what the hell are those things called? Pitcher plants. I like pitcher plants a lot. I think that they're really cool. And maybe, yeah, I mean, mushrooms are pretty cool too. But yeah, just let us know what your favorite plants are. If you have any comments about this episode or any prior episodes that we've had, any feedback or input that you want to leave us, please go ahead and let us know in the comment section. Please consider giving us a thumbs up and a subscription to our YouTube page. It would very much help us out. We just got to 30 subs and we are very happy about that. So we are trying to make it 40 subs, and hopefully in another year we will achieve that goal. So thank you very much, you guys. And we really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening. And until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there, and we will catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.